attend that or listen into that, just so I can see if there is anybody on the call today that did join that last session. As I said, I'm the Director of Positive People HR, and the vision of Positive People HR is to make organisations great places to work. And obviously there's varying ways in which we can do that. Thank you, Jane. I can see that you attended the last one, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoy this one too. So yeah, the vision is to make organisations great places to work. So Positive People HR focus on the compliant element of HR in terms of dealing with day-to-day issues with people, making sure that policies and procedures are in place. But then the cultural side, the positive side, the engagement side, providing initiatives to get people engaged with organisations and therefore putting in the extra discretionary effort. So that's just a little bit about Positive People HR. Paul, Addy the person. As you can see, I am MCIPD. I'm a qualified director of HR with 20 years experience in all aspects of HR. My experience has been as a generalist, and therefore I have experience of all the aspects of HR, as I say there. I've worked for large corporate organisations such as Barclays. I started my career at Barclays. Then working at the Co-op Financial Services, General Electric on the financial services side, Pace Technology, and Asda at their head office in Leeds. But most recently, I've been the director of HR for a company called the Lowell Group. It's a medium-sized financial services organisation, and really that's where I was able to put in a lot of my experience and knowledge in play. When I joined the organisation, there were 250 people, and now they are 1,300 people, and they're an invested in people gold organisation. And we worked very hard to put in the positive culture that goes with being a gold IIP organisation. So I'm very proud of what me and my team and the team at Lowell achieved in getting there. Obviously, this webinar is about mediation, workplace mediation, so you're obviously not surprised to see that I'm a qualified workplace mediator. I was trained by the TCM group in 2013 and hold a national certificate in workplace mediation. That particular course is 6 days, 3 days of theory and 3 days of practical assessment. It's quite intense, I have to say, but quite interesting. So I qualified in 2013. So everything that I really talk about in here in terms of the theoretical side around conflict and the context and the process is the TCM process, just to kind of make that clear. Also qualified as Savile and Holmes, I think it's just Savile now, level A and B practitioner, so that's in terms of psychometric testing. So that's a little bit about me. Let's get into the business of what we're here to talk about. In terms of the learning outcomes, I'm going to explain the context of conflict, just to give a little bit of a background to what conflict is. Then we're going to understand what workplace mediation is, how the process works and the time it takes, and when we go through that, you'll see how long it can take to do an effective mediation, and then to understand how using workplace mediation can benefit an organisation and its employees. So we start off with the context and what is conflict. So what is conflict? Well, it's normal, it's natural, and it's an inevitable aspect of working life. Obviously, you're putting a number of personalities in one place, and that can cause conflict. Now, obviously, it usually occurs when either individuals or group of individuals believe that another individual or another group of individuals is preventing them from achieving their needs or goals. So, the individual knows what they want, but something is preventing them from getting there. Preventing access to resources they need to achieve their needs or goals, or preventing them from expressing their values or beliefs in a way which they consider reasonable. So somebody may feel that they believe that they're being treated inappropriately, or that the organisation is doing something in an inappropriate way, and they don't feel that they can express those views. And we'll talk about how some of those things come about when we go into the actual context. So our actions and reactions and interactions determine whether it becomes and remains constructive or becomes destructive, which is obviously not healthy, but it is avoidable and is escapable. And that quote's from David Little, 2009, who is the founder of TCM Group. If you look him up, he's done obviously a lot around mediation. The root cause is a sense of loss arising from unmet needs. Again, it goes back to this needs, and when I talk about the process, we talk a lot about the needs of the individual and trying to identify those, but I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Loss of confidence, it might be a loss of faith or low self-esteem. The loss triggers then negative emotions and behaviours which then become hostile, divisive, and eventually quite harmful. I don't know if anybody's been in a situation themselves where, negative emotions were just kind of, because they didn't have the opportunity to express them, or that they then became harmful to the individual, to you as an individual, or to other people. So that's what conflict is. In terms of how does conflict escalate? So there's 5 stages to conflict. Stage 1 is what we call pre-conflict, and it's the antecedents to conflict. So this is about the root cause. What is it that's causing the conflict? And there's just a number of things, and it could be in another individual, it could be a personality clash, it could be there's a change going on in the business that you as an individual are not happy with, or there's something changing around you. And a lot of the time it can come from leadership. And if you think back to what I just said about preventing someone expressing their beliefs, that's where the leadership element could come from, that they not feel that they can raise their challenges or their feelings, and they believe it's reasonable to do so, but they're not able to do. And then cultural, so it could be just a cultural thing. It could be that the culture of the organisation, the values, the beliefs just don't fit with the individual, which can again cause the conflict. So that's it's those underlying things that are happening that starts an individual or groups of individuals to start feeling this isn't right. I'm not happy here. So we move on to stage 2, which we call early conflict, and we enter the conflict zone. So this is really where it starts, and it's the best place to nip things in the bud if you can. It's about, at this point, encouraging people to let off steam and to allow them the opportunity to kind of say how they're feeling. It's what they call the fight or flight stage. So people will start to fight here, and they'll start to form alliances or cliques with people that they feel are on the same wavelength. They'll start blaming at this point as well. So it really is the start of the early conflict. It's where the frustration and anxiety starts coming out in terms of people's actions. And people, and again I'll talk about this a bit later on, but people start to adopt positions. So they start saying what their position is, or highlighting what their position is within this conflict, and what their stance is and how they feel about it. So it's the very early stages of the conflict. And again, this is where you could nip it in the bud. This is where you could bring in workplace mediator to help kind of nip it in the bud, get it sorted so you can move on in a positive way, which is what mediation is about. In terms of stage 3, this is obviously the most challenging period to manage. It's really where individuals or groups will kind of put tactics together to maintain the upper hand. They are both convinced they're right, and this is obviously where they begin to clash even more. They also at this point might start to bring external influence into it, or seek external assistance. So this stage is all about trying to put together tactics to make the situation work, or to give the view that I'm right, you're wrong, and both parties think they're right. It's a very difficult stage to manage. If we talk about stage 4, which is late conflict, basically this is where it erupts. So it could erupt in a number of ways. It could erupt in the sense of physical violence, if it's got that far, if people feel that that's how they react to it. It could be that it eats away at people. And the cost of conflict here is significant in terms of this is where it becomes destructive and very damaging. And it can start those brutal attacks against people. It becomes much more verbally out there and much more challenging conversation in the sense of the individuals will really be going at each other in terms of what their beliefs are, what their positions are. And this is the problem with it. Well, this is where we don't really talk about the needs, because individuals don't talk about their needs at this point because they don't feel that they need to. They know what they want, so that they just stay at their position. So select conflict is basically where it all erupts and becomes very damaging. So you want to prevent it from getting to that stage. And then stage 5 is what we call post-conflict. So it's picking up the pieces essentially. So what do you do after it's all erupted? And obviously it will depend on the situation. You might be as HR professionals having to go through some kind of disciplinary process, which again takes time. It's obviously a negative action. So what you can do to try and prevent getting to stage 4 or stage 3 even is by developing a strategy for taking into account these stages and how do you manage at each stage. So what do you have in place? Do you have anything that actually prevents the conflict in the first place? In terms of the change in the leadership, how do you involve and again engage people in change to make sure that they know what's going on so it doesn't become a conflict? So it's about putting strategies in place to help prevent conflict in the first place. If it does move into conflict, then it's about having a policy and procedure or a policy in place for managing it. It can be an internal mediation policy. You can create those rather than using an external mediator. But obviously, if you have an internal one, it does take away some of the independence and how people feel, particularly if they know the people involved. Has anybody got a policy in place at the moment, either an internal mediation policy? If anybody can just kind of write in the comments box if anybody has one. So it is important that we try and get to that. So nothing in place, Jane, Leonie, Jennifer. Okay, so it looks like, and do you, I suppose the other question is, do you quite often have conflict situations in your organisation? If you can just kind of, if anybody can comment on that. Oh, Stuart, you've got an in-house mediation service, that's good. Jennifer, yes, every day, yeah. That's not surprising. So I suppose, you've got to think about how you manage those. Yeah, you dealt with it under the grievance procedure, which you can, but you can also prevent it going through the grievance procedure as well, which again can be timely, and we'll talk about the speed of the process a bit later on. So it looks like, there's a number of you that could consider looking at internal or using an external mediator if it comes to that. So we'll move on to the next slide, because I'm talking quite a lot about theory at the moment and I want to kind of get on to the next bit. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about conflict management and styles. So the first one there, you can see a picture of a turtle, and this conflict management style is called a turtle, and it's called avoiding withdrawing. So basically this is where an individual gives up their goals for others because they just don't want to go into that conflict situation. And I'm going to ask you a question a bit later on about that. The next one is the shark. So the shark is basically overpowers and forces their kind of opinions and forces others to accept their view. So it's quite an aggressive stance in conflict. They're never wrong. I'm right. This is my opinion, and this is what we're going to do. The next one is the little teddy bear, and the reason it's got a love heart is that the teddy bear is for accommodating and smoothing. So the teddy bear, the relationship is important to the teddy bear, and therefore they will give up their own goals for other people. So in a conflict situation, they'll just back down. They'll give up their own goals because they want to create harmony and happiness in the workplace or in the situation. The next one is the owl. This is collaborating. So the owl seeks really solutions that work for both people. And there's an interesting, I was going to put it in here, but there's an interesting exercise we did as part of the training with an orange. And we had, the two people standing at the front, both wanting the orange, but there was only one. So, in terms of understanding and going through the process, it's about understanding the needs and asking the right questions, and that's what the mediator is there for, is to ask the right questions to understand each other's needs. Very quickly, the outcome is that, one wanted it to put the peel into a cake, the other one wanted the juice to make a drink. So actually, they could both use the orange, but in different ways. And the owl will be the person that tries to find that kind of win-win situation. And the last one is the fox. Hopefully he'll appear at the bottom there. So the fox is compromising. He'll seek a compromise. So he might give up parts of his goals for the other person. And I suppose he's a bit of a negotiator. So they might give up part of theirs if somebody gives up part of theirs in a conflict situation. And so that's just a little bit of fun there in terms of what those management styles are. And I think I've got a poll next. Oh, not before that. So yeah, go on to that one. Yeah, so this is just in terms of demonstrating that. So your own goals versus other people's goals. You can see the teddy bear kind of gives up their own goals for the other person's goals. So it's really just pictorially shows what I was talking about then. So let's talk about you then. A little poll here. Which would you say is your natural conflict management style in the workplace? Because I think we have them differently in our personal lives to our workplace. So we're just launching a poll now. So if you can just kind of let us know what you think you are. We've got a few teddy bears there. Yeah, don't type in the box. If you can just do it on the thing, and then I can see how many is coming through. Got quite a few owls there. Which again, I suppose, if we're HR professionals, we want to try and gain a win-win situation. With no sharks or turtles. Quite honestly, at home, I'm a bit of a turtle. Try and avoid it at all costs. Do whatever I'm told. But in the workplace, I'm probably more an owl. Oh, right, okay. Leonie, yeah, I like that, yeah. So yeah, so it just makes obviously think about what your style is in the context of conflict. Okay, let's move on. I just want to get to the process part. We've obviously been going on quite a bit already. So let's just quickly go through the components of most conflicts. The content describes the individual's concerns. And conflict is, most conflicts are made up of these three separate components. Tells us what the conflict's about from their perspective, and then the interaction. So how do people behave towards each other? What are their feelings for one another? And then the expectations. How do they want the situation to be handled or resolved? Typical expectations seek a win-lose outcome. Often parties can become frustrated when the actual outcome is a more lose-lose than they expected. So it's trying to get to that win-win situation. Because people tend to focus on I'm going to win and you're going to lose, and we need to try and move through that situation. So that's just the components of most conflicts. So if we just talk about now what is mediation, move on to what is mediation. Hopefully it'll come in, will it? I've been playing with the animation, as you can see. So basically, mediation is a process of conflict management resolution whereby a neutral third party is invited to intervene into a workplace situation to assist with the constructive resolution of that conflict. It creates a safe environment where they can all communicate and work towards the restoration of a working relationship. It's structured, as you'll see shortly. It's very structured. And encourages everybody to identify, consider, and discuss what their needs are. I'm going back to this word again, needs. Workplace mediators encourage and facilitate open and honest dialogue, and therefore increases awareness and understanding and empathy. And it is about trying to understand each other's positions, where they're standing and why they're taking that stand. So again, the other person can identify that and then hopefully empathize about how we can move forward. The outcome of mediation is based on self-determination, i.e. it's the parties, not the mediators, that generate and evaluate, agree the outcomes. It's not the role of the mediator to, to tell them what to do. It's a way of facilitating, and they've got to be determined to resolve it as well. And that's where it can be difficult as a mediator. But I'll talk to you about the process which tries and manage that before we get to an actual mediation. And obviously, workplace mediation gives all parties access to a fair and equitable form of conflict resolution. So that's what mediation is, effectively providing a safe working environment for people to be open and honest about how they feel and to work towards a resolution. So when is mediation appropriate? It's appropriate in the following conditions. So where there's low levels of anger and physical or verbal intimidation. As I said, it becomes very difficult if it gets to physical. You're in a different space if it becomes a physical anger versus kind of low levels. There's no serious breaches of company rules or policy because that would be dealt with in a different way, obviously, within your internal policies. Facts which are unsubstantiated. People are committed to problem are willing to solve. That's the main thing, and we'll talk about how you establish that in a moment when we talk about the process. Where there's a concern about ongoing relationships, it might be that it can't be fixed, and it might not be right, or it might be who's involved that might not be the right situation. And like I said, people are not prepared to work things out without outside help, so it might be appropriate at that point. So those are just kind of when it is appropriate. There are some when it's not appropriate. If we just kind of move on. There are extreme power imbalances between the parties. Again, sorry, this is where you may have a senior executive of the team with a conflict against another team member. That might not be the right time to do it or appropriate to do mediation. There's a behaviour that makes the parties feel that communication and negotiation will be unsafe. Again, it could be that physical violence piece. Agreed rules need to be applied first, including internal companies, which is what we said, and both sides are unwilling or unable to mediate. So there is a time when it's appropriate and when it's not. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to kind of talk about the process. So as I mentioned, I've been trained by TCM, so this is what they call their fair mediation model. So facilitate is to make the process of dialogue easier. Appreciate, to build empathy and understanding between the parties. To innovate, to encourage practical and creative problem solving, to come to the resolution and resolve, and to help the parties reach a resolution to the conflict. So that's their kind of fair model. This is the model we follow as mediators. So we'll move on to the process, because the process is quite interesting, and I want to take a bit of time on this. It's only one slide, so it looks like there's not a lot to talk about, but I'm basically going to talk through the process. So stage one. So if you have highlighted that workplace mediation is appropriate, you would engage with a workplace mediator, and what would happen is that workplace mediator would talk to each of the individuals on the phone, talk them through what mediation is, and make sure that they're engaged with the process. This is where you check whether they're happy to actually take part or not, and they have to want to go through this process. So you would, do the telephone conversation, explain what the role of the mediator is, what you're there for, how it's going to work, what the process is, and basically it's a reassurance about, being independent. You're not there to judge the situation. It's about helping them come to a resolution. So stage two, so that would be the kind of prior on the telephone. Stage 2, 3, 4. Happen on the same day, and it is a day-long process if we're going to do it right, which we want to do it right. So what happens is you would set out the day, the mediation day. If there's 2 individuals involved, it'd be difficult because you can do team mediation as well, but this is based on individual mediation. So you would meet with one individual, so say you'd ask them to arrive at 9 o'clock, and what you'd do is basically you just ask them to tell you the story. So you'd go through and let them let off steam, get it all off their chest. Whilst you're doing that, we would make some notes, and we'd try and understand, and we'd ask them and establish what their needs are. What are their needs, and what is their position in this situation. And we call it PIN, so it's position, interests, and needs, and we try and identify what those are in that first meeting. And it just gives the individual the opportunity just to get it off their chest before the day starts, and allows the mediator to try and understand actually what do they want from this, what are their needs, and what are their interests and what's their position. Once they've done that, what you do at the end of that session, it's usually about an hour, that meeting, it can be up to an hour. At the end, the mediator would ask the individual to go to another room and to write a statement, again expressing what they feel, and what that statement is used is for later in the day to read to the other individual. So they would go away and write that statement. Whilst they're doing that, you talk to the second individual and go through the same process, identifying their, letting them have steam, identify their PIN, if you like. I'll call it PIN just for ease. And again, at the end of that, you'd ask them to go away and do the statement. Whilst they are doing that, the first person comes back, and you ask them to read the statement to you. And the purpose is to coach them into making it a little bit more, because sometimes they can put things like, I really don't like that person, they're horrible. Well, that's not constructive. So you'd coach them and say, well, just what do you mean by they're horrible? What do they do? So really to get the statement in a much better and constructive position, so that it can be used later in the day and doesn't cause more conflict because of the way they're putting it across. So you spend an hour or so coaching them through that process, maybe 45 minutes. And then that person will kind of go off and update it. And then the second person comes back, go through the same process. Then it's lunchtime, normally. And then what happens is you have the joint meeting, which is the stage 4 there. So you would get them both in the room. And what happens first is each person has what they call uninterrupted speaking time. And that's their opportunity to read their statement out. And the other person is asked not to make any comment at all, to allow the individual just to read the statement out. And then they would, obviously, the other person would read their statement and have their uninterrupted speaking time. Then this is where the facilitation by the mediator really comes in, because this is the point where we will pull out certain things that have been said from the sessions earlier on and this session in terms of trying to understand their needs. And they may have said in their statement, I don't like the way that you do such and such. I don't like the way you talk to me. So what the facilitator would do, or the mediator would do, would kind of turn that around and say, so what I heard you say is you don't like them. So what would you like them to do? Why don't you like the way they speak to you? So it's about trying to, again, turn things around. And also, if someone acknowledges that they might have done something wrong, is picking that up and saying to the individual that's kind of had an apology and say, how's that made you feel? Does that make how do you feel about that? Did you hear that apology? So it is about facilitating the things that have come out of the statements and how people get them into a lesser stage of conflict. Once you've kind of gone through that process, the final process is then using coaching methods to get them to come with an action plan. The key thing about the mediation process, if you're following this process, is there is an action plan that's written up on the day by the facilitator, by the mediator, that's signed by both of them in terms of what actions they're going to do. So you might use, there's different tools that you can use. You might just use kind of stop, do, or change or something like that in terms of what you want them to do. And some people use coloured hats methods. There's a number of ways in which you can coach people to come up with solutions, but it is about creating solutions. The mediator would then, before the end of the day and before they leave, would type it all up, give a copy to both people, and they both sign it. They keep a copy. The mediator would keep a copy. And hopefully that then we've got into a situation where they both agreed how they're going to take the situation forward. And then stage 5 is follow-up and evaluation and reflection. So the mediator would follow up with each of the individuals to see whether they're maintaining the action plan and whether the situation has got better. So as I said, in terms of time, it is a full day process. But if you can get to the point at the end where you've got an action plan, the conflict has dissolved, then obviously from an organisation point of view, that's what you want to do. So that's just a very quick, I could talk for hours about the process, but that's just a very quick overview of that. Has anybody got any questions about the process at the point before I just kind of move on to the benefits of using mediation? I see somebody's typing there. Yeah, a few people typing. Um, yeah, I think the key to it is following the process, and having someone qualified, because it is about identifying what the conflict is and the needs. Yeah, so absolutely, it can only happen if both parties are willing to enter the process, and that's what stage one is about. Stage one is about the mediator, giving them the confidence to say yes and agreement to it. If you've got a situation where they won't even talk to a mediator and they're just not happy, then there may be a different way. It might depend on the situation of how you deal with it. It might be that you have to go through a grievance procedure in that situation. It depends what the situation is. But yeah, absolutely, you've got to get both of them engaged in that process. But that's the mediator's role, to try and do that and give them the confidence and reassurance about the process. And we do talk heavily about the process in that telephone conversation. Uh, so does the process have to be conducted in one day? Is this essential? And it is. I mean, that's the way that we're encouraged to do it as mediators, because it's about get into the conflict. If you did stage one, stage two, for example, individual meetings, I think they could obviously go and talk to people. It could steam back up again. I think if you don't do it in one day, there's an opportunity for it to escalate even further. So it is key, and I would encourage and say that we should do it in one day. Leonie, what about allowing an individual to come to a meeting? I've been reluctant. No, absolutely not. It's not any kind of formal meeting, obviously. And I think it would intimidate either of the parties, and particularly if the party that maybe didn't have a representative or someone with them. And it is about them being open. It's about them working out their differences. So it's not appropriate to have someone else in the meeting. I wouldn't suggest that. What happens if it really doesn't work? Um, Yeah, if it doesn't work, we need to look at why it hasn't worked. Is it because the conflict is just so serious that we need to identify another way? It might be, again, it depends on the situation, but it might be that just one person's very, very stubborn. It could be a shark, and they're just, they're right, and that's it, and I'm not prepared to talk to anybody. And again, depending on the situation, would depend how you deal with that, and what is it they're being stubborn about. So I think that could vary. Um, oh, hello, I've just gone off. I can't see the slides anymore. Is that me? Oh, we're back. We're back. Yeah, Lonnie. Yeah, it's right that they shouldn't have anybody there. Okay, I'll give you a chance to ask questions then. We'll just quickly whiz through kind of the benefits. So in terms of the benefits and advantages of mediation for organisations, it reduces the costs. Again, if you're going through a hefty grievance process, it can take a lot longer management time, investigation. It's obviously conflict is resolved positively in a meaningful way, hopefully. I'm not guaranteeing that it will always work, because it does depend on the individuals, but I would do my best to make sure that it did. Reduction in lost hours and due to stress and sickness. Again, if you deal with it very quickly and get a mediator in or resolve the situation, then hopefully they're not going to go off with stress or absence. Releases of the staff to become more involved in more productive activities. So again, it's that dealing with it quickly, so that not thinking about who might be involved in a grievance. Let's keep it contained to the people involved, rather than having to go wide than that. Adds value in the sense of it, again, resolves the situation. And then throughout the process, any prejudice or inappropriate behaviour or bullying are challenged positively and constructive, so leading to a positive wide culture. So if you, hopefully you don't need to use mediation a lot, but if you were doing, and hopefully that, what comes out of the mediation sessions is that much more positive view of how to resolve conflict, and therefore you hopefully have that wider positive culture, organisation culture. In terms of for managers and leaders, provides a swifter resolution, therefore reducing the drain on the financial and management resources. They feel supported by the organisation as well, so managers and leaders will feel happier that they're being supported, they're not being left to manage the situation. Again, freeing up managers to engage in more productive activities, reduces managerial stress, and it assists with restoring the psychological contract. Again, it's that piece and links to engagement around them feeling that they're being supported, and therefore that the organisation is supporting them. And then the last one is just for employees. Individuals have a sense of greater control during that process. It ensures that people get things off their chest. They feel listened to by an independent mediator, will not judge or blame them. They've got a greater stake in the outcome, because it's their outcome really. And mediation creates a win-win outcome, hopefully. It considers historical factors while focuses on the future, so it does look at, well, what's happened, but let's focus on the future. We'll talk about what's happened, but it's more about the future. Individuals feel valued by the organisation, and again, reduces stress, anxiety, fear and harm, which obviously can impact negatively on the individual. And I think that's learned. So would anybody be interested in discussing mediation with me in more detail? Is the poll that Liz is just going to go up? There's a question, I think. If one or both parties do not abide by the agreed action plan, can this be treated as a conduct issue? And that's a really, really good question, actually. I think it depends to what extent they do. If the conflict situation might be a bullying or a harassment situation and they continue to do that, then obviously it would lead into something else. Again, it's hard to say. I think it depends on the situation. In that situation, I would say yes, it could lead to dealing with it as a misconduct issue. But on other ones, it may not be the appropriate. It depends on the situation. Again, like anything with people, you judge it on a case by case scenario depending what it is. So there's a few people just on the poll there interested in discussing mediation with me in more detail. There's a few people there that'd like to do that. So if anybody's got any further questions on anything that I've talked about this afternoon. Yeah. Yeah. There's a few people typing there, so we'll just wait for the questions. It's a really interesting area, mediation, and obviously having been trained in it, it's really interesting the process that you go through and the effect that it can have on the individuals. It can cause some interesting. I'll just talk a little bit of a story during the training whilst the questions are coming through. In one of my practical situations, I was being the mediator, and the individual walked out of the mediation. Angrily threw down papers and walked out of the mediation. Obviously it was staged to see how I deal with that, but it was an interesting experience in terms of how you deal with people that are walking out of the room that you're mediating in, and obviously it is about kind of finding them and then sitting with them and kind of understanding what brought on their actions and trying to encourage them back into the room. But again, okay, so Jennifer asked, can you give us a few examples of questions that you could use to check people's engagement in the process and what their individual needs are, please? Yeah, so in the process, to check engagement in the process, I think you would ask things like, okay, how comfortable are you with what, particularly on the first call, if you can try and get them engaged in that way, how comfortable are you with what I've explained? Do you have any kind of concerns? You could ask why are they considering coming to this, or why are they coming into this? Because that would then understand, well, what are they wanting to get out of it, which kind of links into the next question about what their individual needs are. But in the sessions themselves, when you're talking in the first session, when you're letting them get it off their chest, I suppose what you're identifying through the needs is, okay, well, they've told you what the story is. Okay, you could, like you do sometimes in a grievance, you'd ask, what would you want the outcome to be? And if they say, well, I want them sacked, say, okay, well, why is that? Why do you want that to happen? Because that will kind of, to some extent, pull out the needs. So there's a number of things that you can do. Jennifer, do people always know what their needs are opposed to their wants? Really good question. And throughout the process, you do talk about both to some extent. Um, you do talk about the needs, but there is a section or a session where you can talk about the wants as well, which is what I suppose I just said is, what do you want from this process? What you do once you know what they've said is kind of turn that around and say, why do you feel that you need that to be the outcome, kind of thing. So, just one more question we've got time for, because I know we've run over. Presumably the process moves on to the grievance procedure if a party is still unhappy with the outcome of the mediation. Yes, I suppose, it would do. If they're not happy with, you've tried to resolve it that way. If not, it would move on to the grievance. I had to say, part of using mediation and the benefit for the organisation, which I didn't put on there, is obviously if you were in a situation where, it didn't work, you went through a grievance procedure, the person left for some reason, resigned, and then raised a tribunal claim. From the organisation's point of view, you've tried to resolve a situation, so the tribunal would look more favourably on you for carrying out that process. So yeah, so I think. Yeah. Obviously, if there are other questions, I can get back to people. We've missed some questions, so Liz will let me know what those questions are, and we can get back to you. So thank you for your time. It's really nice to be on the webinar again. I am going to be running another webinar in November on whistleblowing on the November the 18th. Again, that's going to be on whistleblowing in terms of policies, etc., etc. So I hope you join me on that one. Thank you for attending this session. I do hope you've enjoyed it and learnt something from that. And nice to be on again. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for some brilliant questions there. Really appreciate it. The last two webinars we've got left for the rest of to take us up to August. We've got disability discrimination next week with Marie Walsh, and the week after we've got developing people using the 70-20-10 model. So I do hope you can join us on some of those. And as Paul said, he'll be back on the 18th of November to talk all about whistleblowing. So I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you very, very much, and we'll get back to you with those few questions that we missed. So sorry we ran out of time there. Thank you ever so much. Have a good week.